Attention is another really important reason why energizers are helpful. Recently, I've become obsessed about the theme of attention for many reasons. One, I started to realize that my students were losing their attention faster and faster recently. I'm also starting to recognize that it's not only the famous unfocused Gen Zers that are struggling with this, but executive students also struggle. I see them getting distracted by all kinds of different things much more these days than before. I see it in myself where I'm finding it harder and harder to dedicate deep work. This is across the board a human challenge. We can blame it on digital devices, but we need to recover our capacity to pay attention to each other, and to pay attention to the important and purposeful work that we're all dedicated in. And Gloria Mark is probably the leading scholar on the planet who has spent very meticulous time doing research on the amount of time that we're capable of dedicating to one particular task before we're shifting and moving on to different tasks or getting distracted by digital devices. And in this book, she has these extremely scary statistics about how that attention span all across the board has started to get smaller and smaller and smaller. And so I'll let her speak to her own statistics.
Well, I mentioned in the introduction that you have found evidence that our attention spans have shrunk in recent years, at least as measured by how long people spend on tasks and screens at work. Can you talk about that? How much have our attention spans shrunk?
So, we started measuring this back in 2004. And at the time, the measures that we used were stopwatches because that was the most precise thing we had at the time. We would shadow people with stopwatches. For every single activity they did, we would record the start time and the stop time. So you're on a screen where you're working in a Word doc. As soon as you get to that screen, we'd click start time. As soon as they turned away and checked email, we clicked stop time for the Word document, start time for the email. But fortunately, sophisticated computer logging methods were developed. And so, of course, we switched to those. So back in 2004, we found the average attention span on any screen to be 2.5 minutes on average. Throughout the years, it became shorter. So around 2012, we found it to be 75 seconds. This is with logging techniques. This is an average. And then in the last 5-6 years, we found it to average about 47 seconds. And others have replicated this result within a few seconds. So it seems to be quite robust. Now, another way to think about this result is the median. The median means the midpoint of observations. The median is 40 seconds. And what this means is that half of all the measurements that we found were 40 seconds or less of people's attention spans. Now, obviously, because we're talking about averages and medians, sometimes people do spend longer. But quite a good bit of the time, their attention spans are much shorter, and with an average coming to 47 seconds.
So to review those scary statistics, 2004, we were at 150 seconds of our capacity to pay attention to one particular task. By 2012, this has dropped by half to 75 seconds. 2018, down to 47 seconds. And so the question is, where are we at now? We need to be really mindful that when we do our best work and when we establish the best connections and when the teams that we're in thrive the most are moments of attention, of deep focus. And so again, energizers are such a useful, practical, impactful tool to bring them in when you notice that you are losing attention, to bring them in when you notice that certain teams are dropping off when it comes to focus and their work. So simple to drop these tools in, bring everybody back into the present moment, into the task at hand, and we move forward again. This is a good example of an attention-focused exercise. We do many different mindfulness exercises. I'm not sure if you want to consider them to be energizers or not, but this one in particular is definitely an energizer because it involves movement. We're not just sitting and focusing on our breath. We go out into nature and we start to move slowly and start to notice every single little sensation that we feel while walking on the grass. Some students take off their shoes and feel the grass and the bottom of their feet. I ask them to feel the wind hitting their skin, gravity bringing them down, the balance of their bodies taking them very, very slightly left and right as they take their steps, listening to the surroundings, the birds, the water, whatever it may be. And after 10 minutes, we've practiced and encouraged and guided our minds to come back to that extremely important present moment. This is what it looks like. So peaceful, so connected, and so practical. All it takes is 5 to 10 minutes. Here's another focus exercise. Definitely brings attention, but in a much more active, playful, and engaged fashion. The famous invisible ball that disgruntled student was talking about its ridiculousness. So a person tosses an invisible ball to someone else by making a noise. The person that catches the ball needs to make exactly that same noise. And then they release the ball to someone else in the circle with a completely new noise. And the person that catches that ball needs to make that exact same noise, and so on and so forth. And then the key is that the facilitator starts to toss in new balls with new noises. There comes a point where there's 5, 6 balls in a circle, and so you really need to pay attention to follow through on all those noisy, invisible balls.